Welcome to the show. Today I have Holger Greif on the show, and he's the Chief Operating Officer at swissQuant. And I'm very happy to have you here, Holger. I wanted to have you on the show for a while, and I finally reached out to you to talk about this because you had some changes as well on your journey, and just super excited to have you here, Holger. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity, and glad that you finally made it to reach out to me.
Absolutely, it's never too late. So let's dive right into your journey. Tell us a little bit more about who is Holger and what's been your journey so far.
Yeah, Holger Greif, and I'm in business for more than 24 years now. And I started as a physicist, did my PhD together with the industry, where I really learned to think in structures and methods extremely to the point. But also then I find out that the pure university background is not my future journey. So I went then into professional business with a spin-off from one of the top strategy houses, where I was more than 3 years working on really business IT strategies. This told me the toolkit of strategic advice. And this was back then when the e-business hype really started. And then I went to the US. I joined a startup. When I joined, I was number 5. We were serving one of the big brands, telecom providers back then from Finland. I was responsible to scale their business as a consultant with the company, with the startup across the USA. We were pretty successful, so I grew the business from 5 to 6, over 60 people. But then the e-business bubble burst. So I came back to Europe, did a couple of very exciting technology projects in the stock exchange environments. And then I finally got to Switzerland together with my family and created a management consulting company together with a couple of friends. Also grew this to more than 55 consultants. And then we sold this to one of the big fours, to PwC. And there I was 12 years in various functions, building the technology practice, heading consulting. And since 2015, I was responsible for the digital services and innovation practice. Pretty sure we come back later on some of the details there. But then in 2019, I said, okay, time for change, to switch the hats, going from a consultant to the real world of operations. When I joined then in April 2020, in the middle of the lockdown, swissQuant, in the capacity of the Chief Operating Officer for the entire group.
Very, very interesting journey. I had no idea that you actually built the management consulting firm and then sold it to PwC. See, something new discovered here.
Yeah, this was back when the non-compete was over, and as I said, I joined in the capacity from when we sold our boutique, and then for the 2 years I was responsible for building the technology practice, and then I was asked to really take over the consulting practice for Switzerland, and it was fun, a lot of excitement, and also it was a change. If you had to lead management consultants or if you have to lead partner colleagues and motivate them in certain ways and to stick to budgets, remind them on client first principles, etc.
Let's dive right in there in terms of client first, or just the focus on the customer or the human being, because I'm super excited to always talk about that topic. So it's about human-centered innovation. And I mean, the first question that I have there is, in your perspective, how important is it to have the human in the middle of innovation?
To me, it's the most important factor. I mean, what really excites me is to co-create new ideas. I mean, when I was in the US, one thing that back the first bubble of e-commerce really taught me was to really think big and to think in moonshot dimensions. And you can't do this if you don't have the people with you. And I always said I like to have various disciplines in my teams together with the clients to really cover all the various aspects. So without a human-centric centered innovation, I don't think you can really make it. I saw it a couple of instances where you had technology first, but if you really don't address the need of the people, of the clients, the end customers, technology doesn't solve it. You really need to define what are the jobs to be done, and then walk along these lines.
Interesting. And I'd love to hear some more of your experience on that topic. Maybe you can share some, more specific experiences that you had when it comes to, this human centricity or even customer centricity. Maybe when it comes to innovation. Maybe you can share something also from your PwC journey, or anywhere else that you had. I'd be super interested to hear that.
Yeah, independent if it was with PwC or with previous. I remember once a project where it was for a small medium enterprise, 40 people, but they were serving an entire industry as essential functions, and they had to make sure that the labor are built on a fair basis. And when we started, the challenge was they did everything in Excel and via email. And then the task was really to guide them through in the digital transformation and to be audit compliant. That's because you can imagine if you have to deal with labor, salary, fares, etc. And then we really built an entire platform for them, and that's what I mean with the jobs to be done, because they were serving more than 1,000 clients, companies in Switzerland, and they had to do this in a very intuitive way. And it was really the first mission there to find out what type of jobs needs to be done to really change the perspectives and to see who has what type of demands, desires, wish lists, and then bring all this together.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing that example. And something else that I'm always interested in as well. And you already went a little bit into that direction, but there's certain things that when you have that foundation that make digital innovations fail for sure, and then there's other things that you can do that maybe not guarantee success, but that make it probably more likely for things to succeed. In your experience, what are these things on one side and on the other side? Do you have any insights on that, any perspective, experiences?
Well, first, it's this lovely term like fail fast. And I think what digital really taught me in the various instances is to define the boundary conditions. What do you need to be successful? But also to define the criteria on success or failure. And with digital, you can really think through what are the most costly topics. I mean, in the past, when I started my professional career, buying hardware, software was extremely expensive. These days, with clouds, with AI, toolboxes, libraries, etc., you can really think through how to fail fast and to learn. And then take the people along. Don't put yourself in the middle of this. Put them, make them the heroes, and then it's not a failure. Then it's more called a lessons learned. At the same time, if you're working in a corporate environment, this type of failing fast is extremely difficult if the mindset from the top management is not there. And I think that's still something I'm seeing. It's really important to have the executive board, the board of directors with you to really tell them what does it mean to fail fast. And it's actually not a failure, it's a success, because you did this with limited resources and with limited risks.
Talk to me a bit more about that. That's a very, very interesting topic that I hear very, very often when it comes to management buy-in. When it comes to maybe traditional companies or maybe even very modern companies where, there's an investment horizon that goes beyond what is known, So, maybe normally it's, I don't know, in the company, it's 9 months and then something needs to be profitable. But, with new things and something that is untested or exploring things, or even we're talking about business modeling, I mean, that's very, very difficult in terms of time horizon. So when you have management in the conversation, basically, my question is, how do you get buy-in for bigger investments, for stuff that you know that makes sense to drive forward, but maybe it's not very clear that it's going to make money in 6 months from today.
Yeah, firstly, it's all about expectation management. I mean, when you start innovation and an innovation project, top management these days, they are really trained on the corporate structure, on clear org chart with clear objectives, KPIs, etc. And innovation doesn't fit into the regular management cockpit. So this is the first education, is that you really make expectation management and say, okay, this is a test in the funnel. Secondly is, don't underestimate the power of narratives and storytelling. I was one of the birth giver for an infrastructure, finance infrastructure, when they came up, or we together came up with a new business model based on blockchain and DLT. So we locked ourselves for 3 days in a room and immersed with various impulses. What does blockchain actually really is? This was back in the days when blockchain was still not so known. But also to make sure we understood what are the capabilities that the client brought with them. So this created automatically acceptance because it was based on existing strength and adding new capabilities. And then after the 3 days, we were more or less done. We had great ideas, but then it actually started again, because then we had to train and educate the client how to tell this when they come back to their environment, to inform their management what are the outcomes after an innovation session like this. And we really trained the client how to tell the story in a very intuitive way, to show the excitement, but also to have respect in terms of this traditional KPI and objective setting. This was in 2017, 2018, and I think the world is really advanced, much more advanced. So back then it was a lot about awareness. I strongly believe these days it's about activation, not only mentioning the new normal with home office, Zoom meetings, etc., but also to really make sure you focus from day one on how do you generate money, and don't fall in love just with an idea because it's technology based, or even you think you found the job to be done, but really starts using tools like the lean canvas models, etc. Start from the day one on to think through how to make money with the business model.
It's a really, really interesting insight. I mean, there's two things that I found really interesting that I heard in terms of management buy-in. One is the storyline, really put in the effort to understand what is the actual story, what is the storyline, how do you convey the message in a way that is actually, that they understand the why, that they understand the benefits of it, that they truly understand what's in it for them. And then on the other side also, really, maybe this comes before that, really understand the other perspective, really understand the other person, the other party, try to step into their shoes. And because it's very difficult if, I'm coming from, let's say, technology, and you're somebody who comes from, the business, and I'm trying to convince you, but I don't know how you think. I don't know what's important to you. It's incredibly difficult to me then. But once I understand what's really important to you and how you think and why you think that way, it's a lot easier for me to convince you, because I'm not telling my story, I'm now telling your story. And
yeah. And just to add there, I mean, in my spare time, I'm also a fellow of Diplomatic Rebels, and we are an association for innovators around the globe, and we have a couple of ground principles, and there are two ground principles that I really love. The first one is accept that people hate your project. Because you don't show up in the morning in an established organization, say, hey guys, everything you did the last 20 years is totally wrong. I'm super smart, I'm coming with an innovative idea, and you have to follow me. The people will hate you, and you need to understand this. And it's not because against you as a person, but because it's against their foundation, their principles. And one thing we do always there is we call this to write a love letter. Make them appreciate what they're doing and be very explicit there. So rule or principle number one, accept that people will hate your innovation project. And the second one, in terms of the diplomatic and rebel, is only break rules that you really understand. I mean, even a rule in a corporate environment sounds totally inefficient, not needed, but the rules, they don't show up in the morning because somebody thought it's a great idea to have just a rule. There's always a reason for this. And this might be because of legacy IT, legacy processes, legacy audit findings, whatsoever. So before you say, okay, let's change something, let's innovate, let's come up with a different rule set, understand why the rule is there, and think through how you can really change the rule.
I really love that. Really love these inputs. There's some great ones. I mean, going back to expectation management, it's so much easier to be appreciative of the environment if you go into this environment with the expectation that, you know, it's not like everybody's going to be excited. Everybody's going to be not excited and probably go like, what does this guy do here? And, you know, it's going to be, you know, a mess because, you know, he's coming in. It's really, really cool. Really interesting perspectives and principles, actually. Very interesting. Thanks for sharing. And something else I wanted to talk to you about is stakeholder, or dealing with different stakeholders, basically. So let's say you have the business and you have the customer, and, you know, there's certain strengths that the business has, certain focuses and strategic decisions, and then there's certain needs that the customer has. And sometimes there's a lot of alignment, and then sometimes there's a little bit less alignment. And how do you deal with, you know, situations where different stakeholders come together and they somehow need to get on the same page, or we need to find the overlay, but it's very, very difficult because there's a lot of conflicting agendas and needs, basically?
Yeah, I mean, when I started to really look much more into details on digital transformations, this was, as I said, 2015. We were always looking for a common understanding of a burning platform. And back then, everything was in the normal situation. Everybody was in growth. Everything was okay. So it was really hard to identify the burning platform. I think these days, with the new normal, a lot of people see the advantage of digitalization and identify much more easy the burning platform. And I'm shifting this from burning platform to accept the change. Everybody knows about the VUCA world, but I'm thinking through about the challenges of the simultaneousness. All the influences coming from Corona, coming from technology, digital opportunities, exponential growth, gender diversity, everything comes at the moment at the same time. And that's a burning platform in itself. And this harmonizes on a certain level the various stakeholders, because every stakeholder has the same exposure. Just take ESG, environmental, social governance. Everybody is worrying about the climate change. So this gives you a new normal and some sort of a story. And when you align your innovation story around this simultaneousness, around this burning platform, the challenges, but also the opportunities there, I think this gives you a great foundation. And this gives you already a pulse of the various stakeholders. But that's just the first step. The second step is I love OKRs, objectives, key results. And it takes a corporate between 6, 12, even 18 months to really get familiar with OKRs and to agree on objectives and the key results. But once you have this, you can measure this. Innovation for me is to be creative in the beginning. So the innovation funnel is very open in the beginning, but then it's about extremely discipline in implementing this. And OKRs and running sprints there gives you a great chance and methodology, but also communication points to touch base with all the various stakeholder groups, but also make sure they understand and they commit to what you would expect from them. So this is from the joint story with the burning platform, the simultaneous list via OKRs, sprints. This goes then much more into the implementation execution. And then it's really an art. It's an art of transformation. It's an art of digitalization, of innovation to bring all these together. I remember once I had also for another infrastructure provider a project about impact of digitalization to the work environment in 10, 15 years. So it wasn't about specific technology. It was really more the overarching patterns. And there we had also the unions as an important stakeholder group. And the unions have such a different thinking about security of a job, physical security, but also the job security in itself, versus top management, who was really driven about the digital opportunities. And then to align between unions, top management, that was a great challenge, which we mastered, I guess, pretty fairly well in the end.
It's really interesting what you said in the beginning about these burning platforms. I think you call them, because basically what I heard out of it is that there's always something that we have in common, or there's always something we both care about. And let's find this common denominator and make that the alignment, basically. Make that the basis and then build on that.
Yeah, but don't fall into the trap to look for the smallest common denominator, because then you don't move anything. You can't, for innovation, you can't please every stakeholder. And you have the normal distribution of stakeholders, the people who are totally enthusiastic. You don't need to convince them. And the people who are totally cynical, and then the broad range in between, so the silent yes or no sayer. And I think this is where you need to also think through with the love letters, etc. How do you really motivate this silent gray mass of people to make them being part of the innovation journey?
Yeah, that's another great point. You can't convince everyone, and not everyone needs to be convinced or pleased. So really, really interesting. It reminds me of the saying, it's not about pleasing people, it's about serving people. Big difference there.
Yeah, the servant master, which I'm a very big fan of. I mean, I'm the least important person in an innovation project. I'm there to be the catalyst. I'm there to remind them what is really the impact. So, for instance, everybody is talking about user experience, user interfaces, etc. That's great, but in the end, what really counts is the impact that you generate for the people. What is really the job that you do as an innovator versus what the end customer really needs? So don't fall into love just with the innovation idea. Always think through what can you change for the better on the end customer side.
I love that input. And I want to talk a little bit about leadership as well when it comes to getting people on board and keeping people on board. So in times of change, like when something is new, something is transforming, something is dramatically changing, how do you get people to join you? How do you get people on board with the journey?
Make them excited. I mean, my life is really the red line in my life is the mixture of being curious and taking risk. But I don't expect that from everybody. So it's really to find what are the strengths, what motivates the people. In psychology, this is called the iceberg model. So on an iceberg, you see 1/3 on top of the waterline and 1/10 above the waterline and 9/10 below the waterline. And by talking to the people, having a lot of coffees, green teas, or these days Teams and Zoom meetings, understand really what you see, what you observe. So what you see in the 1/10 above the waterline, but really gets building the trust that you start lowering the waterline, that you really understand what motivates them. And everybody has some met and unmet desires, and finding the unmet desires and start to addressing these unmet desires, this is where you really make out of a project member really a fan and a teammate.
I love that comparison to the iceberg, and also what you said, like everybody has an unmet need or an unmet desire, and finding that, and basically once again going back to serving people, truly serving them, and on making them understand how, for example, a project is serving them or serving that need or serving that desire. I think that's a great, I mean, it sounds quite simple, but I think it's often the simple things that we overlook because they seem so obvious. And then the second part that I want to talk to you about is, how do you keep people engaged? You know, stuff goes wrong, stuff goes in the wrong direction, stuff is way more expensive than we thought it's going to be, and it's going to take 5 times longer than we initially thought. How do you keep people engaged? How do you keep people part of the journey, either the sponsors of the projects, or at the other side also people who are basically in the project itself?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the sponsors, it goes back to what I said in the very beginning. It's really about the expectation management. You need from the very beginning, you need to define what are the KPIs you get measured against. And these are not the traditional KPIs like top revenue, contribution to the P&L, etc. This might be the number of onboarded clients, the number of requests for newsletters in the very beginning if you're in B2C. Something where you can really measure progress, where you can see when exponential growth is really kicking in, and to agree from the very beginning on these KPIs, and don't let management sponsors get back in the middle of a project of an innovation saying, okay, but now you're already 1 year on the road and you haven't delivered X, Y, Z as profit. Well, I never promised this profit, so it's really about this expectation management, but it's also really about building tribes and alliances. I remember once I coached in a sales team of a very famous coffee producer on agility, and we had the sales team. And we really coached them on OKRs, agility. We used the Lego play and all these things. They were totally excited, but then they went back into their organization and they had to request something from the CFO. And the CFO said, well, you're not in my 5 years mid planning, so please take a number and go back. So don't forget the circumstances, the boundaries you're operating in, and you really need to take them also with on the journey. In this case, it was not the mission to take the CFO department on an agile journey, but at least explain to them what is the reason we're doing this agility to really get back into a leading position in the market, and take them also on the journey. And the same is true for the people, that if there is a reason why you need to change direction, like prioritization changes, etc., never tell them a story that's not true. If top management decide on something, make them part of this, be explicit why there was a different decision made, and what is the chance. And there's always lessons learned when you reflect on a situation, and let the people, as a good coach, let the people reflect by themselves what was in for them, what have they learned, and how can they apply this in the next journey.
It's really interesting. Also regarding the KPIs and in expectation management and admitting when something like goes wrong or there was a mistake made. For example, you know, what if you pick the wrong KPIs in the beginning and you realize it at some point, right? I mean, there's the danger, of course, is that, you know, it's such an emotional baggage that you just, you know, keep at it, but it makes no sense. I mean, what would make the most sense is being honest about it and having a conversation and trying to change it. But I just wanted to hear your perspective on that. What if you at some point realize, you know, we picked the wrong KPIs, we're measured against the wrong thing, and if we continue doing that, we're actually going to end up at the wrong place. We're not going to, this thing is going to die. What do you do?
Well, this goes back in terms of try to be as cost efficient and fail fast from the very beginning. So when you're in the middle of a journey, when you did the proof of concept, so let's say you go from a POC into the minimal viable product, then it's easier to realize the changes. It becomes much more harder to scale. And for me, the tricky part of innovation is that you go from POC to MVP. That's easy. But from MVP to really scale this into business, it's really the tricky part. Because then it's when the innovation thinking, the creativity meets the established businesses. And for me, the only chance to do this in the right way is to onboard them from the very beginning. So have really the old gray hair engineer and the young digital entrepreneur going together to the client. I had this once with a big industry customer where there was a new CDO, great ideas, but really not getting really the traction. And once a very traditional mindset, hardcore engineer and the young CDO went together to a client and played together, and they had great stories. Then they saw how they can benefit from each other. So sometimes it's not about the KPI. Sometimes it's really just to change the narrative, the storyline, creating this experience in the field, in the reality. Ultimately, if innovation doesn't work, there is no guarantee for innovation to be successful. And you need to be also very explicit about this from the very beginning. It's always a test and fail. When Edison was inventing the light bulb, he knew 100 different ways how the light bulb did not work. So it's a lot about expectation management also from the very beginning.
Thanks for sharing all of this. Thank you, Holger. Really appreciate it. There's one more question I always like to ask. So let's imagine now you're sitting in your rocking chair, you're 80 years old, and you're looking back at your life and looking back at the world and everything that has changed in those many, many years. And so you're sitting there. What would you love to see changed when you look back at that point? In the world of business, anywhere?
Well, these days, not only with COVID and others, but also with climate change, if I would have one wish is that we really start thinking through the circular environment. That's the Western style of dealing with our environment, but also dealing with topics like diversity, education, applying digitalization. I would love to have a circular environment thinking embedded, value-based, embedded in everything that I did from now. I'm turning 53, so in the next 27 years.
I love that. Thanks for sharing this. Really appreciate it, Holger. And thanks for being on the show and sharing all your insights, perspectives, and experiences. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if anybody out there has any questions, feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn and other means. Happy to discuss this. Happy to get challenged. As I said, it's really all about making a change, creating an impact, and learn from each other. So happy to hear your feedback.